Today is, I believe, the 6th anniversary of R.A.C. That's R.A.C. And what R.A.C. stands for is Ribs After Christmas. This is a tradition that I've done with my son-in-laws for the last several years. And it's basically where we get together after Christmas, usually during the continued holiday season, and we have ribs. Well, we just don't have ribs. We have ribs for lunch. And then we usually watch one of our favorite movies, and then we go do an activity. And some of the activities we've done in the past is we've gone bowling, we've done escape rooms, we've done like this Star Trek flight simulator. Today we're going to Top Golf. Which is kind of like a fancy driving range. I've never been to it before, but I've heard good things about it. But I have 4 rack of ribs, and I'm going to show you how I prepare my ribs. These are actually baby back ribs because, you know, they're quite a bit smaller than the full-size ribs. And what I have here, I have some lemon juice, I have some mustard, I have garlic powder, onion powder, pepper, and salt. And we're going to season the ribs with those ingredients, and then later I'm going to make a barbecue sauce to put on the ribs to finish them off. Sometimes I'll bake the ribs in the oven, which is around 250 degrees for several hours, and sometimes I'll do them in a smoker on the grill outside, but because it's about 28 degrees right now, I'm not going to be smoking anything during the winter time. But we're going to go ahead and prepare these, and ribs are almost ready to go. There's not a lot of fat on this one, but on the back side of the ribs where it curves, there's this thin membrane that we got to peel off. And I've always found a butter knife is really good to get to this membrane. And we're going to go here to where you can see one of the ribs, and we're going to slide this underneath that membrane. And it's almost like a thin sheet of plastic. That's the only way I can describe it. So I'm going to go ahead and start peeling this off, and we'll see how far we can get. So you can see my finger is underneath this membrane, and we're just going to slowly peel this off and get as much off as we can. It seems to be more prominent on older ribs than younger ribs, but it just makes the ribs a little bit more easy to fall apart. And the membrane can sometimes, you know, it's one of those things that can kind of get stuck between your teeth, and it just makes the ribs a little bit nicer to eat without this membrane. So we're going to go ahead and start seasoning it. Now, I always like to put a little bit of lemon juice on all my meat. It just kind of gives a little bit of an acid, and it just makes the meat taste just a little bit better. So I'm just going to kind of put it all over here, just rub it down. And then we're going to take some mustard and apply it almost like a cream here. Just going to work that in on both sides of the ribs. And I have all my other ingredients already open because, as you can see, my hands are pretty messy, so it's going to make this a little bit easier. We're going to dust it with garlic powder. And then we're going to dust it with onion powder. And we got the salt. Pepper, I should say. And then the salt. So this is all done for this one. that's ready to go in the oven, and I cook this at 250 degrees for probably about 3 or 4 hours. My next step is I get a roasting pan and to actually do the cooking in. If I'm going to be doing it in the grill, I'll just do it right on the grating. But with a roasting pan, I take 4 standard canning lids and put those down on the bottom, because I don't want my ribs to be on the bottom where all the fat and stuff is going to end up being. I want to lift it off the bottom as much as possible. And we're going to go ahead and put the rib inside there. I'm going to add about a cup of water down on the bottom just to keep everything nice and moist and help the ribs soften a little bit better. And we're going to go ahead and put this in the oven. To start my recipe, and my recipe is tomato based, and it's a little bit more of a sweeter barbecue sauce than not. And because it's tomato based, there's several ways you can do it. I can either go with 2 cans of paste tomatoes, or I could go with 4 cans of tomato sauce. But last year we had quite a bumper crop of tomatoes, and so I made a whole bunch of tomato powder and then freeze dried. Well, this was the tomato paste out of the straining machine that I had, but then I freeze dried it to make tomato powder. And I just have this in my freeze dried pantry. This was back from October 22nd, and I have this in a gallon Ziploc bag. And inside of this, I have individual pre-measured little bags of 1 cup of tomato powder. And one of the things about tomato powder is once it's freeze dried, it becomes hygroscopic. And what that means, it's very sensitive to moisture, and it almost wants to seek out moisture. And if it does, once it gets exposed to moisture, this tomato powder will become extremely hard. But you can see that this has been stored now for almost 3 months, and it's nice and powdery still, and it's not a problem. I can keep this in my pantry, not in a jar and not in a Mylar bag, for probably 6 months to a year, and by then I'll use this up. So we're going to go ahead and use the tomato powder from the tomatoes out of my garden instead of the tomato sauce or the commercial tomato paste. So we're going to go ahead and take 1 cup of tomato powder and put it into the pan along with 2 cups of water to hydrate the tomato powder. Now, in addition to that, I also have a tablespoon, and here comes that word again, Worcestershire sauce. So 1 tablespoon of that, 1 tablespoon of soy sauce. Now, the soy sauce that I use is the same brand that Kroger has. The Kroger brand, now this is if you're wheat sensitive, and my wife has to be gluten-free. This soy sauce doesn't have any wheat. Most brands do. Next, we're going to add a 1/2 cup of warm or almost hot molasses, and the reason I have it hot is so it will pour decent and not leave everything inside. And then I have a 1/2 cup of brown sugar, and I have 1/2 cup of white vinegar. So we're going to go ahead and mix this up before we apply the heat, and then we're going to add our other dry ingredients. Okay, next come like the dry ingredients. So we have 2 tablespoons of dry mustard, and we have 2 tablespoons of butter, 1/2 teaspoon salt, 1/4 teaspoon pepper, 1 teaspoon crushed red peppers, and 1 teaspoon of liquid smoke. And we're going to go ahead and combine that all together under medium heat, and we're just going to reduce it down into a nice thick paste that will stick to the meat. So I'm going to reduce this down. It's almost to the point which can be nice and thick because I want it to stick to the meat and not fall off the meat. So it's almost there. I'm going to thicken it up just a little bit more just by reducing it over low heat. And then when the ribs are done, we'll go ahead and put this on the ribs that I can finish it off with, and then we'll go ahead and serve that up for lunch. These are the ribs after 3 hours at 250 degrees, and we're going to give them just a little bit of a pull test to see how soft they are. And here's a little piece of meat here, and it pulls apart really easily. So the ribs are done. So we're going to gently flip these over without breaking them. And we're going to go ahead and get our sauce. Now some people like to do their sauce on the side. I like mine on the ribs. So I'm going to sauce these things up, and then I'm going to put them back in the oven, uncovered, about 15-20 minutes, just to kind of glaze the sauce over. And then we're going to go ahead and serve them. So back in the oven these go. Now I still have a lot of sauce left over. This recipe is usually for several racks of ribs. And so rather than let this go to waste, we're going to freeze dry this. But first I need to find out how much I have, because each Harvest Right tray will hold about 4 cups. And so I need to find out how much I have. And because of the sugar, the molasses and the brown sugar in this is going to crystallize somewhat during freeze drying. And so to reduce that crystallization, we're going to mix this with some water. And that's not a problem, because you got to remember the water is going to sublimate out. So I have about 3 cups of sauce here. So I'm going to add 4 cups of water with my 3 cups of sauce, and that should be enough. So I can put this back into the pot here. I'm going to add my water. And I'm going to go ahead and mix this up. And this kind of seems crazy, putting all this water in my barbecue sauce, but there's a method to the madness. So I'm going to go ahead and take this. And so each of these now have roughly about 4 cups of sauce in here. So I'll get my good old Harvest Right tray. I'm going to put it in my freezer, and then while it's in the freezer, I'll pull this out a little bit, and I'll go ahead and pour this into the tray and freeze it. If I put this in now and try to walk it down to my freezer, it's going to splash all over the place, and it's just going to make a mess. So I'm going to go ahead and pre-freeze this sauce and add it to my next freeze dry batch. At my freezer, and I'm going to go ahead and pull this tray out just a little bit, and we're going to go ahead and pour my sauce into the tray here. You need to kind of move that down so it doesn't come crashing out on me. since I can only do this with one hand, I can't steady it. So I'm just going to pour that in and freeze dry that and add it to my next batch. So I have other foods in here. I have some rice I'm doing. I got some shrimp up here, my barbecue sauce. And so this will all go into my next batch once this is all pre-frozen for about 24 hours. And I'll lose some of the weight from the moisture in the freezer through sublimation. And so I've calculated about 5 to 6% that you'll lose in pre-freezing. I started with 4 racks of ribs for rack day, which is ribs after Christmas. And they went pretty fast. Tell you, when my sons-in-law have ribs on their plate, they don't last very long. And this is all that's left, about half a rack. My barbecue sauce is still in the freeze dryer, and that'll probably be done in a few hours. And when that is finished, we'll go ahead and take a look at that. But this was another successful rack, and I hope there's many more to come. And it's been a really good tradition to bring my sons-in-law together to have a good old bonding experience. This is my barbecue sauce from my ribs I did, and as you can see, it came out pretty good. And because I mixed it with water, there's very little crystallization. Now this is going to be hydroscopic, which means it's going to be kind of sticky to the touch, and it's going to want to absorb moisture, so I need to package this up as soon as possible so it doesn't go rock hard. So I'll send this through my food processor and powder this up, and then when I want some barbecue sauce in the future, I just have to add a little bit of water to this, and there we go. So this pretty much concludes my video on my ribs. I hope you use that rib recipe. I've had that recipe now for about 10 years, and it's a really good recipe, and I enjoy it. And often we'll have ribs for family dinners and for, you know, picnics and other events. So I hope you found this useful. I'd like to thank you for your time, and please subscribe and go forth and freeze dry the world, and I will send you another video soon.